You're listening to the Folio Sightlines blog, which brings advisors actionable insights that help them grow their practice. I'm Greg Vigrass, President of Folio Institutional. Our expert interview series gives you the industry's smart thinking on issues that matter most to advisors. If you would like to suggest a speaker or topic, please email your ideas to media@folioinstitutional.com. Today, we're joined by G.J. King, President of RIA in a Box. RIA in a Box's mission is to enable fellow entrepreneurs to create their own registered investment advisory firms and receive the ongoing support they need to remain in constant regulatory compliance. G.J. and his colleagues have helped over 3,000 investment advisors start their RIA firms and also provide ongoing monthly compliance assistance to over 1,500 SEC and state-registered RIA firms across the country. Beyond RIA registration and compliance services, the RIA in a Box team often assists investment advisors with broader business decisions, such as custody, technology selection, and many other considerations. G.J., welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Greg. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Well, let's jump right in. Today, we'll talk about the SEC's changes to the Form ADV and how advisors should prepare for them. Because advisors have many questions about these changes, our conversation with G.J. will be broken into two parts. The SEC new rules for Form ADV take effect on October 1st, 2017. What are the biggest changes advisors need to be aware of, G.J.?
Well, thanks, Greg. I think at a high level, these latest changes with the Form ADV reflect a bigger picture trend with the SEC at a high level, where you're seeing just a larger, more, I'd say, expectations around data. The regulatory expectations as it relates to being able to provide detailed and organized data continues to just increase each and every year. And these latest ADV changes, I think, are further reflection of that. At a high level, these changes are going to impact all advisors, both at the state and SEC registration level in at least some way. And you will not be able to file an amendment on or after October 1st unless you answer and provide the information to these new questions. There's a series of changes taking place, but really at a high level, I think there's four main categories of changes that are likely to impact the majority of RIA firms in some manner. The first would be social media. For the first time ever now, much like an RIA firm discloses their website address and things like that, firms are now also going to have to disclose their company's social media pages. And what that means is if it's a company-controlled social media page at the firm level, they're going to need to provide that address. So that could be a Twitter page, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. In general, you will not need to disclose individual reps or advisors at the individual level their social media addresses. And that was, early on a potential for this rule, but that was kind of altered in its final version. However, if your firm controls the individual advisor social media site, so say it's really a company-run social media page on behalf of an advisor where the company, the RIA itself, controls that, all the posts, things like that, firms are probably going to need to also disclose that as well. But generally speaking, it's company social media pages. The second category is more detailed information about regulatory assets under management. Historically, for a while now, firms have had to obviously disclose their total regulatory assets under management, but as it's been broken down as far as types of clients, things like that, it's been more broader percentages. So you've been able to say, up to 10% or 11 to 25%, or maybe you have 25 to 50% of your assets being managed for high net worth individuals, et cetera. This is changing a bit, so it's going to be a similar format, except you're now going to have to disclose the exact number of clients and regulatory AUM attributable to each of those client types. So when it comes to high net worth individuals now going forward, you're going to have to disclose the exact number of clients and also the exact amount of regulatory assets under management attributable to high net worth individuals. And your total regulatory assets under management on the Form ADV is going to need to match and add up to all your underlying categories. So you're going to need to have exact data. You're not going to be able to file the ADV unless all your subcategories add up to your total. Third category is wrap fee programs. And again, not every RIA sponsors or serves as a portfolio manager of wrap fee programs, but for those that do, you're going to need to be providing more detail about RAP fee programs. And particularly, you're going to have to break out the attributable regulatory assets under management when you're serving as a sponsor or portfolio manager of a RAP fee program. And then lastly, another category that will impact the vast majority of firms actually is separately, new changes related to separately managed accounts, where this is really a new requirement being added to the Form ADV Part 1, where you're going to need to break out for separately managed accounts, again, the attributable regulatory assets under management by asset category. So, for example, some of those asset categories might be, at a high level, you're going to have exchange-traded equity securities or U.S. government agency bonds, U.S. state and local bonds, and there's a list of 12 of those categories. That's a new list. So you're going to have to be able to divide and break down how you're managing those separately managed accounts in much greater detail. And then requirements, if you're a larger firm, over $500 million or even more requirements if you're over $10 billion in separately managed accounts are also going to have some greater detail. And then lastly, some other items that are also being impacted by these new Form ADV changes is you need to disclose in general the use of an outsourced chief compliance officer, some additional kind of disclosure around referral compensation, and you need to provide information for larger firms on the 25 largest branch offices, where historically you only had to provide that detail on your 5 largest branch offices. So sorry, that's quite a bit of a mouthful there, but hopefully, a high-level summary of some of the changes.
No, that's great. There's certainly an awful lot going on, and I would suppose some real challenges for advisors in terms of sorting through this and understanding how to best address and handle this. Let's dive into a couple of these areas just a little more specifically. What are some of the questions specifically that you're getting asked by advisors as they prepare for and go through this change? And second, are you seeing differences on these specific questions or issues being raised if an advisor is state registered versus SEC registered?
Sure. So as far as questions, as far as being state or SEC registered as an RIA firm, the challenges are relatively the same with these changes. The exception being that if you're a larger SEC registered firm, kind of over $500 million, maybe using that as a reference point, there are going to be some additional disclosure requirements that are unique to your firm compared to others. But for the most part, being state or SEC registered is not going to make much difference. There's been a lot of confusion around that, but the same Form ADV is used at the state and federal level. So these Form ADV changes will impact, both state and SEC registered firms. We've received also quite a few questions around, do I need to file an amendment on October 1st when these changes take place? And the answer is no. You can wait to file your annual updating amendment. Usually for most firms will be in the first quarter of 2018, so that's due by March 31st, 2018 if you have a traditional December 31st fiscal year end to make these updates. So you're not required to file an immediate amendment to provide this new information, but if you do file an interim amendment, for example, you make a change to your ADV in November, you are going to be required to provide this new information before you're able to submit that amendment. So if you're just going into your Form ADV to make a quick change, you're going to have some challenges because you're now going to need to provide all this additional information. So for the most part, it's going to impact firms when they file their annual update amendment, when they will be required to provide this information. But you do need to be aware that if you file an interim amendment, really beginning any time after October 1st, you're going to have some challenges with that. Another question we've had is around social media, kind of a more general question of, hey, should I be more concerned about using social media for marketing purposes? The answer is generally no, but you should expect more scrutiny as it relates to social media going forward. So you're going to need to follow some best practices. So, without getting into too much detail, some high-level things to think about are make sure you're treating social media just like any other form of advertising, making sure all posts are reviewed, and making sure all posts are archived. So those are some of the high-level questions, we're seeing thus far, Greg.
Thank you. I'd like to follow up on one other item that you mentioned that's of interest to me, and that is the changes to the new separately managed account, or SMA, disclosures. And I've got a couple of areas I'd like to touch on there. What are the burdens and benefits of breaking out wrap-free data? And the follow-up question to that would be, is that information readily available from commonly used portfolio management software, or are advisors asking or planning to ask custodians for additional support in terms of data needs?
Sure. So maybe to kind of unwind a few of those questions here. So first of all, the high level, nothing has really changed with these ADV changes as it relates to how a separately managed account is quote unquote defined. The one challenge is really the SEC doesn't technically define what a separately managed account is, but as far as kind of the Form ADV instructions that aren't changing as part of these changes, the SEC has generally defined, separately managed accounts as any, really any regulatory AUM attributable to clients, excluding items kind of 5D, 3D-F. So what does that mean? Really, for purposes of reporting on the Form ADV, they say we consider advisory accounts other than those that are pooled investment vehicles, i.e. registered investment companies, business development companies, and pooled investment vehicles that are not registered, including essentially private funds, to be separately managed accounts. So what does that mean? It really means almost every RIA, traditional wealth management RIA, is managing separately managed accounts. I think often there's a lot of misconception that, I don't provide sub-advisor services, or I don't provide portfolio management services to other firms, so I'm not a separate account manager. But the reality is it's a very broad definition. So the vast majority of RIA firms are going to be deemed to be utilizing separately managed accounts. That's why that impacts actually a lot more firms than they probably realize. In general, I think what you're seeing as it relates to separately managed accounts is that you can maybe suspect that the SEC believes there's potentially a gap in their current data gathering. They already have a lot of detailed information required to be disclosed around kind of the composition of what's being managed in private funds or mutual funds, and with so many assets kind of in separately managed accounts, and particularly in the RIA industry, I think they view this as kind of a gap in their data gathering, so this is going to close one of those gaps. As it relates to separately managed account categories, as we kind of referenced earlier on, there are 12 new SMA asset categories, such as exchange-traded securities, U.S. state and local bonds, investment-grade corporate bonds, cash, etc. This information today is not always readily available from portfolio management systems. The systems will likely contain this underlying data, but we haven't always seen kind of organized reporting in this format. So I think this is kind of changing as we speak today, as a lot of these traditional portfolio management systems and reporting companies are quickly kind of trying to adapt and make sure this information is easily digestible and readily available. So, for example, I believe Orion, as one example, has already rolled out new reports to help advisors gather data in this format. For advisors that don't work with a portfolio management and reporting solution, to your question, though, it's likely they are going to be looking at their custodian or custodians for this data. And frankly, at this point, it's not entirely clear if custodians are going to be able to provide this type of categorization. All custodians may not be able to break out, securities in this different into these categories. So I think it's going to vary a bit by custodian, and probably going to catch some advisors off guard when they realize that getting access to this data may not be as easy as it seems. And then last, in regards to wrap fee programs, this has been a regulatory focus area and will continue to be. Advisors using wrap fee programs need to be very careful to ensure they're acting in their clients' best interests. Reverse churning, undisclosed fees, those are two categories that remain a focus area. And I think you're going to see this new data will allow regulators to more easily prioritize firms for exam that are utilizing wrap fee programs. So there's not a lot of change really happening for firms as it relates to wrap fee programs, but you're seeing I think these latest changes reflect the continued regulatory focus from the SEC and at the state level on wrap fee programs.
GJ, thank you for your insights on this topic and the several items that we've been able to dive in for. I do have a few more questions for you that I'll cover in the second half of our conversation. I'd like to invite all listeners to visit our Sightlines blog for the second part of our conversation with GJ King from RIA in a Box. Neither Folio Institutional, its parent Folio FN Incorporated, or its sister companies have a control contractual relationship with today's speaker or his firm. Folio has not compensated our speaker in any way for this interview.